Okay, so this is our notes on cellular respiration. If you haven't opened up your Cornell notes there on Google Classroom to take your notes, please do so now before we begin. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so our central question here for our notes is, what is the role of the mitochondria in the breakdown of glucose to create energy for cell use and releasing carbon dioxide? So that's what we're going to learn, what happens in cellular respiration. Okay, so it does happen. It is the process of breaking down food molecules to release energy. And we basically break down the food molecules to release glucose. And then glucose is broken down to create what we call ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy molecule that our body uses. And the second thing is respiration occurs in the organelle mitochondria and the cytoplasm. So it actually occurs in two different places. It'll occur in the cytoplasm and the mitochondria, and we'll go over that. There's a couple essentials that you're going to need for cellular respiration. The first one is you're going to need oxygen. And where do we get that? From breathing in. Okay. We also need glucose. Plants produce it, and we eat the plants, or an animal that is eating the plants, and that's how we get the glucose. And then digestion, which breaks down food into the simple building blocks of glucose, which is what we need therein too. And it must be available to move inside of a cell. So that's where we have that cell transport that we talked about before. And then it enters the mitochondria and converts glucose to carbon dioxide and adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. From now on, I'll just call it ATP. And of course, what do we do with the carbon dioxide? We breathe it out, okay? So here's the overall reaction of cellular respiration. So we have glucose plus oxygen, we get some enzymes, and then we get to come out carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which our body can use. There's 3 stages of cellular respiration. The first one is what we call glycolysis, and if there's so that'll happen, we'll go over that. But if after glycolysis happens, if oxygen is present, the next step you'll see is the Krebs cycle. And if no oxygen is present, the next step will be fermentation. We'll go over both of those, what happens. But let's just assume oxygen is present, that we're breathing, so we get the Krebs cycle, and then the third step would be that electron transport chain. Okay, and this occurs in all cells. So this not only occurs in animal cells, it also occurs in plant cells. All right, so let's look at stage 1, glycolysis. This is the breakdown of glucose. So glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. An enzyme assisted, it's an anaerobic process. So an means no oxygen, okay? So aerobic talks about oxygen, and an is no oxygen. Process that breaks down glucose to what we call pyruvate. And you don't have to know too much, just know it's called pyruvate. And like I just said, it's an anaerobic process. No oxygen is actually required in the cytoplasm. And it produces 2 ATP molecules for us to use in our body. It also produces carbon dioxide. Okay, and then the pyruvate that comes out of glycolysis, actually that is what enters the mitochondria. Okay, and the big thing that we just went over for the third time here, it does not require oxygen. So glycolysis is the one that does not require oxygen. So let's say there's no oxygen. Let's say you're exercising a ton and you don't have enough oxygen. So what's going to happen? So then it'll go to this stage 2, which is fermentation. And this is when no oxygen is present. So if no oxygen is after a glycolysis, then fermentation occurs. And there's 2 of them. The first one would be alcoholic, and the second one would be that lactic acid. And you probably are more familiar with lactic acid. It is the production of lactic acid which causes those sore muscles after a workout. So when you're a little bit out of shape and you're not breathing in as much oxygen as you probably should, then what happens is after the glycolysis happens, it actually goes into fermentation, producing that lactic acid. And as you probably all know, as you exercise more and get into better shape, then this actual fermentation to lactic acid in your sore muscles decreases. Okay, but here's an overall look, and we're going to go through each stage here. We have glycolysis here. And you can see there's stuff that goes from glycolysis. So glucose goes in glycolysis, and then that will go into the cell to the Krebs cycle and electron transport. So now we're going to talk about what happens if we do have oxygen. So if we're not exercising, or maybe we've exercised enough and we're in good shape, and we're keeping the oxygen in our cells, then it'll go to the Krebs cycle. Okay, and this is when oxygen is present. Pyruvate enters what we call the Krebs cycle, which is our second stage, and it is an aerobic process, which means it requires oxygen. And Krebs cycle produces some high energy electrons that are used in stage 3, which you'll see is the electron transport chain. Okay, so it goes from glycolysis. If we have oxygen, it'll go to Krebs cycle, and then it'll go to this third stage, which is our electron transport chain. Okay, and 2 ATP are produced. Okay, and as we just said, if there's no oxygen in there, then you'll go from the glycolysis to fermentation. Okay, all right, and carbon dioxide is produced as well out of the Krebs cycle. So after the Krebs cycle is what we breathe out. So carbon dioxide leaves the cell. Okay, and then we have a stage 3. So we take those ATP molecules that we just created in stage 2, and their high energy electrons help ATP. You don't have to know this. This is just kind of background information to help ATP synthase make up to 34 ATP. So we take those 2. We had 2 before. Now we're making 34. And this is an aerobic process, and it requires oxygen. And also water is created. Okay, so the electron transport chain is here. Here's our ATP. It's making all our ATP, and it's also making water. Okay, and you don't have to know everything of how it works. The biggest thing you need to know is that it goes from glycolysis, it'll go to a Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain. And that glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm, while the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain both happen inside the mitochondria. So this is an overall kind of respiration that I want you to understand. You will be asked on the test some things about lactic acid, which happens if there's no oxygen. So we go from stage 1 glycolysis to stage 2 Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain. And at every point, we're making ATP. And we take in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. Okay, and glucose we take in. And we release water. So what comes out of respiration? You've got carbon dioxide and water, and what comes in? You've got glucose and oxygen here. Okay. So similarities between photosynthesis and respiration. Both are related to energy. We're both making ATP in both of them. Okay. Both use organelles. They use different ones, but they both use organelles. And both use what we call electron transport chains. And you'll learn more about electrons in chemistry, okay? These are the overall reactions, and I want you to look at these pretty carefully. So you can see that photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water, gives you glucose plus oxygen. We've gone through that. But then, okay, aerobic respiration or cellular respiration, we take glucose and oxygen and we make carbon dioxide and water and energy. And look at this. So these are our reactants of photosynthesis to our products. Look at this. Look at these products of photosynthesis. They show right back up the same exact ones in cellular respiration. So these products of photosynthesis are the reactants of respiration. And then look at the products of respiration. Carbon dioxide and water. The products of respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis. So it's like a big circle. So light comes in, photosynthesis happens, makes its products, which then go to cellular respiration, us, goes through it. We make our products of respiration and send those right back up to photosynthesis. So that's how we got to the point where the autotrophs and the heterotrophs need each other to survive. Okay? So you can see carbon dioxide plus water and glucose plus oxygen. So you can see how they're opposites of each other. Okay? And here's our whole kind of big picture. So the sun comes in, we get our light energy, photosynthesis happens, glucose and oxygen come out, go into cellular respiration, which makes a ton of ATP for us, and then water and carbon dioxide come out and go right back into photosynthesis. So it's a cycle, and even if you remove just one of these or take one of these out of balance is when we get everything kind of messed up, okay? All right, so go back and through your notes. I want you to highlight any important information. I want you to write any questions or maybe personal connections you have with the notes in that left column there on your Cornell notes. Then use your highlights, questions, and personal connections to your notes to write a summary. And you're going to write a 3 to 5 sentence summary of your notes. And then once you're done with that, go ahead and turn it in. All right. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.